All right. And today, this is a guide to GDPR for U.S. companies. And so we're going to spend the next 45 minutes and discuss about how GDPR might affect your business. And if you're not familiar with it, we're going to definitely be helping you out just to understand a little bit more about it. And if you're the owner of a company, this is for you. If you're a manager, a marketer, or a content specialist for your website, or even an IT professional, this is for you. And then if you do business in Europe or a small bed and breakfast, this is also for you. So this really encompasses a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And it's not specifically, despite whether you may be coming from the understanding of GDPR, where this is based in Europe and this is a EU requirement, this does actually affect US-based companies. And we'll kind of go over that today. So our webinar is meant as a practical guide. It's not the end-all, be-all of everything about GDPR, but hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a greater understanding of what GDPR means to you. First of all, though, I would like to explain and just share a little bit about Baytech. We are a company, or a leading digital marketing agency located in Silicon Valley. We've won numerous awards, including the 2008 Communicator Award and the 2018 IMA Award. So we're really excited about that. We wanted to share just a little bit about us, and we work with many different industries, which really provides us the best ability to understand what and how GDPR will affect your business. And, we're going to go over today's agenda. So the brief overview here is what is GDPR, and we'll have a baseline understanding. So what is it, and why does it matter? We'll talk about the penalties. How does this affect my company? And we should cover how this might affect your role too. So do you manage an e-commerce site, or do you capture information about customers through an online form? Almost everybody does. Does your company do business in the EU, the European Union? And what might you do to address this? So does this mean a company or reorganization? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, no, but we will discuss what this means for you and what kind of resources at the end, if you have any questions, help answer any questions that you might have. So we're going to go over a brief overview here and what is GDPR and what are the requirements. So the GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. So it went into effect actually about a month and a half ago on May 25th, and it's still, as of right now, still many people are not ready for this. And that means not many companies and not even the regulators themselves. So basically what GDPR is a set of new rules of how companies should treat user data. And that's things like customer names, credit card information, those kind of things. And it gives individuals, those same individuals, more control over their information and how it's collected and processed. And it's much more strict than previous regulations in the EU. So again, if you're a US company, you may not be even familiar with those, but it's important to understand this is much more restrictive, and that's the reason why there's a little bit more attention for US-based companies on this. And it requires companies to ask for permission much more often. So then after about 4 years of deliberation, the GDPR was officially adopted by the European Union in 2016. The regulation just went into effect, and it gave companies 2 years head start to get compliant, which should be good enough amount of time to get ready. But the requirements is for companies to take a risk-based approach and build a workplace culture around that data protection. So the reality, according to The Verge, an online news publication, is the reality is this: the implementation of this is going to be a lot messier. And like term papers and tax returns, there are people who get it done early, and then there's the rest of us. So for our overview, these are some of the rules. The goal of the EU is to put the pressure on companies like ours that process EU citizen personal data. And the real bottom line is to tighten the data protection process. So creating a data use policy, the GDPR requires organizations to have policies, procedures, and process in place to protect that personal data for the EU citizens. And then, behind the scenes, what it's more meant to do is control how that data is used behind the scenes. So when you, for example, on your site, you collect some personal form data, how do you manage that behind the scenes? Do you store it in an email? Do you put it on a server in a database somewhere? Do you use a marketing automated system, something like that? How do you process this? And how that the rules involve those things. And then so when a user clicks through, a customer may enter credit card data. Similarly, that's another case too. And then the notifications. There's two types of notifications. The first one, I just mentioned that one about data use policy, but the second one is a data breach. And for most companies, a data breach won't be most likely, or you won't know how to find that out, but it's a pretty big deal. And it's really, they put in a set of ambitious rules spanning with the requirements for the EU regulators. So if you're hacked within 72 hours or no less than 72, you need to notify that you were breached to those EU regulators. The rules are much more extensive than this, but this is just really a high level for our purposes today. So the penalties are quite stiff, as you can see there. So if your companies have been found not to follow these rules, you could be fined a minimum of 4% of your company's revenue for the previous year, or $20 million. It's quite a big deal. It's whichever is greater, actually. So you've heard about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, or even just a few days ago, the EU fined Google for $5 billion in an antitrust fine. Well, what does this all mean for you, right? So really, that's who they're going after, but you're not Facebook or Google, but you're a US-based company. So the answer is that it does, actually. All right. So I'm actually going to address this by first explaining how you might affect you and your role, and what you may want to do or can do to affect this. So GDPR compliance for your company. So if you're in a position of making fundamental changes, and then you must be the one who considers risk tolerance, what kind of risk tolerance you might have in that role. So we'll elaborate in the next section on all of this, but there's no clear path towards full compliance. So I know that sounds a little bit vague, but that's the reality. So let's break it down to the fundamentals. Do you have a business in the EU? Do you have a business where you have EU customers who are citizens? And does your company store any information about EU citizens? So if you answered yes to any of those questions, or there's even a likelihood you may need, or you have a future need to include those, this EU law for GDPR does apply to your company. Ultimately, however, it'll be up to your company to make a decision that fits your needs. So I'm going to kind of tell you about a case study here, and which one, in fact, actually of a Baytech client. And I'll tell you about which we were trying to determine with our client if this new EU law would apply to them. So we've been working with them for a little over 6 years, and they are a software company specializing in business operations automation. It's quite technical. Baytech developed their original website, and we've developed their new website. Their company is based in the United States, its headquarters here, but they have offshore location outside the EU. So it came to their attention they might be in a position that they need to address the GDPR within their company, these new requirements. So first we did an inventory of all their digital assets, which included for all personal identifiable information, or PII. So if you haven't heard that term before, PII, personal identifiable information. So the inventory included their website, the e-commerce store, their marketing automation system, and even a custom customer portal they created with their software team. And so we evaluated all of that. It turns out that their system was managed by some data which may be collected by EU citizens. So it kind of set a flag for us, and we said, okay, well, definitely it sounds like this is going to impact you. But next we determined how this might affect them, given their headquarters are still in the United States, they're an offshore team is outside the EU. We know they're storing customer data on EU citizens really doesn't outright mean this requires a change on how they store the customer data. But we want to look at that further. Our next determination was that 80% of their business was done in the United States and in other countries, but 20% came from the EU, like countries like UK and France, Germany, Italy, and so on. So this was a too big of a deal for them to ignore, right? So with GDPR, with the deadlines looming, we decided to take action on a few things. So number one, what we did, we applied an opt-out form for any customer who did not wish to have their data stored. We did that universally across all data, everywhere where customers would interact with. The next thing we did was we sent a cookie notification. So meaning that if they had not come to the site before, it was their first time, we would notify them that we were collecting information, and then this is how we were collecting it. So we created a data policy in which to make sure that they had this on their site. Again, very simple stuff. Now, did this solve everything? Absolutely not. But within just days, we were able to accomplish what some of the main requirements of GDPR did and what they're asking for, which really outwardly communicates to any regulators that we have efforts and we're in current participation to be compliant. And so that's kind of, we felt a very big deal to really match, also just to understanding that, we do care about data security. So, what the story shows is that by simple updates to the website, we showed the efforts of compliancy, though we may not have been able to follow every aspect.
But as I will explain in the next webinar in GDPR, I will explain what compliance means and what it means to you. Thanks so much for attending our webinar today on GDPR. I hope this was a great intro into what GDPR means and provided some practical explanation about how GDPR might affect you and your company. Thank you so much. And you know what? Don't forget to share and like this video. Thank you.